Right now, at the bottom of the North Sea, under the shipping lanes, under the oil rigs and the wind farms, there is a country, not a sunken city, a whole landscape. Rivers, hills, coastlines, forests, and the people who lived there. For years, fishermen dragging their nets across the seabed between Britain and the Netherlands have pulled up strange things in the catch. The bones of mammoths and lions, stone tools, a spear carved from antler that hadn't seen daylight in 8,000 years. They were dredging up the remains of a lost world, a real inhabited land that the sea didn't just cover. It erased it so completely that for a long time, no one believed it had ever been there at all. This is the story of Doggerland, the country at the bottom of the North Sea, how thousands of people lived on it, and how, in the end, it may have drowned in a single afternoon. To understand Doggerland, you have to forget the map of Europe as you know it. 20,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of the last ice age. So much of the planet's water was locked up in ice that the seas were far lower than today. In places, more than 100 meters lower. And where the cold gray North Sea is now, there was dry land. That land joined Britain to the rest of Europe. You could have walked from what is now England all the way to Denmark and never once seen the sea. At its greatest, Doggerland stretched across an area the size of a country, tens of thousands of square kilometers of open plain. And as the Ice Age loosened its grip and the world began to warm, this was no frozen wasteland. It became one of the richest places to live on the entire continent. Picture it: wide river valleys winding toward distant coasts, marshes and lakes thick with fish and birds, rolling hills, woodland, grassland roamed by deer, wild horses and aurochs, the giant wild cattle of prehistoric Europe. For the hunter-gatherers of the Middle Stone Age, this was paradise. The rivers gave them fish and fresh water. The wetlands drew migrating birds by the thousand. The forests gave them game and wood and shelter. Many archaeologists now think Doggerland wasn't the edge of the inhabited world at all. It may have been the heart of it, some of the best land anywhere in Northern Europe. And we know people were there, because the sea keeps handing us the proof. That antler harpoon, hauled up by a trawler, was a hunting weapon, made and used by human hands. Since then, the seabed has given up flint tools, worked bone, even fragments of human skull. Every one of them a message from a drowned country. People lived here. This was home. But the same warming world that made Doggerland bloom was also signing its death warrant. As the great ice sheets melted, all that water had to go somewhere, and it went into the oceans. Year after year, century after century, the sea crept higher, and Doggerland, low and flat, was desperately vulnerable. The change was slow enough that no single person would have seen the whole thing happen. But across generations, families would have watched the water come. A familiar coastline, a little closer each lifetime. A hunting ground turned to marsh. A marsh turned to open sea. Rivers backing up. Islands appearing where there had once been dry land. Slowly, relentlessly, the country was breaking apart, shrinking from a continent-spanning plain into a scatter of low islands in a rising sea. And the people would have been pushed back, again and again, onto higher and higher ground. And then, around 8,000 years ago, something happened that may have ended it all at once. Off the coast of Norway, beneath the sea, there is a scar on the ocean floor so vast it is hard to picture. It is called the the Storegga Slide. Around 8,000 years ago, a colossal section of the seabed, a slab of sediment the size of a small country, broke loose and collapsed down the continental slope. It was one of the largest underwater landslides in the history of the planet. And when that much of the seafloor moves at once, it shoves the water above it aside. The result was a tsunami. A wall of water raced outward across the North Sea, toward Scotland, toward Norway, and straight across what was left of Doggerland. On the coasts of Scotland, geologists have found the evidence. A layer of sand, thrown far inland and high above the old shoreline, dropped there by an enormous wave. Now imagine that wave reaching the low islands of Doggerland, flat, barely above the water, with nowhere to run. For the people still living there, clinging to the last dry land in the middle of the sea, there would have been no warning and nowhere to escape. A world that had taken thousands of years to drown may have lost its final survivors in a matter of hours. After Storegga, the sea kept rising. The last high ground held on for a while, a great island where the shallows of Doggerbank lie today. But the water won in the end. One by one, the final pieces of Doggerland slipped beneath the North Sea, and the map of Europe became the one we know. Britain an island, cut off from the continent by cold gray water. And then, the strangest part, the world simply forgot. The drowned country left no monuments, no ruins standing on a hillside, nothing for later people to stumble upon. It was gone so completely that when fishermen first began pulling up bones and tools, no one knew what they were even looking at. It took modern science to bring Doggerland back. Using seismic surveys, the same technology used to hunt for oil and gas beneath the seabed, researchers mapped the buried land in astonishing detail. And out of the data, a lost world rose again. The winding course of a great river, the lines of ancient coastlines, the hills and valleys of a country no living eye had ever seen. We can now stand over a busy stretch of sea and say, with confidence, there were rivers here, there were hills here. People hunted along that shore, and they were laid to rest in that ground, now 100 feet beneath the waves. Doggerland matters because it is not a myth. It is not a legend of a proud city punished by the gods. It was a real, ordinary, thriving land. And the sea took all of it. It is a quiet reminder of something we would often rather not think about. That coastlines are not permanent. That the sea has swallowed inhabited worlds before. And that under the water off our own shores, more of them are almost certainly still waiting to be found. A whole country, with its rivers and its people, lying silent at the bottom of the North Sea, remembered now only by the bones it hands back to passing ships. If you want to see more of the worlds the world forgot, subscribe. There's a new lost story every week. Thank you for watching.